My friends, for the first time since 2022, Ukraine didn't launch a summer offensive. That's because this year Ukrainian forces are undergoing a major transformation, one that, perhaps, would allow for a renewed offensive next summer, or at least allow Ukrainian forces to stabilize the front line. But how exactly do they plan on achieving this? Mobilizing more people. Yeah, but no. The AFU is literally rebuilding its military from scratch. On February 3rd, 2025, Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief, General Syrsky, announced the transition of the armed forces to a permanent core structure. So in this video, we'll analyze why the armed forces of Ukraine absolutely need these army corps, but also the challenges that they will face by implementing these changes. Put simply, Ukraine is looking to bulk. The question is it going to be a clean bulk or a dirty bulk? The kind of videos I create often hit a roadblock when there aren't enough visuals to explain a complex event in a way that you can actually see it unfold. And that's where in-video AI comes in. It lets you turn even the most abstract idea into a full-length video with no cameras, no crew, no editing timelines. It lets you create stunning videos, irrespective of your skill level, and without having to learn difficult programs from scratch. Let me walk you through how it's done. Just start with a simple text prompt and it creates the first draft for you. For example, create a 30-second video about the war between Russia and Ukraine, setting trench war in Donbass. Check out what in-video AI produced only after a few minutes and a couple rounds of edits.
Suddenly the sky fills with drones. It's starting. Artillery incoming. Everyone down. We can't stay here. A massive explosion nearby. Time slows down. Stay or go. Move, move, move.
After this first draft, you can then use the edit command box to match your creative ambitions. Remove voiceover, add subtitles, make the music more epic, make the ending conclusive.
As the dust settles, I realize we've taken the ridge. But at what cost?
Unlike traditional video tools with steep learning curves, in-video AI makes the process super easy, intuitive, and fluid, letting you focus entirely on your vision and ideas. In-video AI isn't here to compete with human intelligence, but to complement it as your creative partner. Become the movie director you've always wanted to be, and create anything you can think of using in-video AI's powerful generative capabilities. And the best in all this is that you can try in-video AI for free. This will save you hundreds of dollars that you would otherwise spend on editing, animation, or other production costs. You can check out in-video AI by clicking the link in the description below. After gaining independence in 1991, Ukraine inherited a lot of things from the USSR, like Chernobyl, commie blocks, and corruption, but also several Soviet armies stationed on its territory. Thank you, Father. By the mid-1990s, these were reformed into roughly 5 army corps. Hold on, what exactly is an army corps? Well, in the hierarchy of military formations, a corps sits between the army and the brigade. We're talking about roughly 30,000 soldiers. But as always, let's start with some history. The story starts with Jacques-Antoine Hippolyte, Comte de Guibert, a key French military theorist of the 18th century. He proposed organizing forces into permanent, self-contained units he called divisions, a concept that was first tested by Marshal de Broglie during the 7 Years' War, and later formalized in Guibert's Essai général de la tactique. Guibert envisioned lean divisions, capable of rapid movement and decisive strikes, unburdened by cumbersome supply trains. His vision began to materialize on the eve of the French Revolution. In 1788, the French army reorganized into 16 mixed infantry cavalry divisions, plus 4 infantry and 1 cavalry division. Notably, artillery was still not organically integrated into these units. That's when someone called Napoleon took this concept even further. In 1800, he created the Corps d'Armée, literally body of the army. Those were semi-autonomous formations composed of 2 to 4 infantry divisions, this time with their own cavalry, artillery, and support units. These corps were remarkably self-sufficient. They were able to march, fight, and sustain themselves independently, such as when pillaging foreign lands. Oh, hold on. As you can see, their great strength laid in flexibility. Napoleon could disperse them across vast distances to cover ground and then rapidly concentrate them for a decisive battle. For example, this is how Napoleon achieved his stunning victory during the Austerlitz campaign. And soon enough, all of Napoleon's enemies would copy that model. In essence, the modern Army Corps retains the same fundamental structure as Napoleon's Grande Armée. In modern NATO symbols, a corps is represented with 3 X's, but it's a concept you're probably already very familiar with. Now back to the Eastern Front. So by the mid-1990s, the armed forces of Ukraine consisted of 5 army corps. However, these corps existed mostly on paper. They were administrative rather than tactical formations. With the reforms of the 2000s, the corps were gradually disbanded and divisions reduced to brigades. As a result, in the armed forces of Ukraine, the brigade is the largest autonomous tactical formation and typically consists of 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers. Now, some people believe that this was all a scheme by the former chief of the general staff, Muzhenko, who did this to centralize command over the army, to make it in a way so that every brigade now reported back directly to the general staff. But look, that's another story. When the war in Donbass broke out in 2014, Ukraine launched the Anti-Terrorist Operation, or ATO. To do so, they set up temporary commands. The front line was divided into sectors A, B, C, D, and M, with Sector M in charge of defending Mariupol. But quickly, with Russia's intervention, Sector D collapsed. And after the Battle of Debaltseve in early 2015, Sector C was Ctrl-Alt-deleted as well. With only sectors A, B, and M remaining, that same year the AFU scrapped the sector system and replaced them with a new command structure called Operational Tactical Groups, or OTGs. Basically, very large task forces. At first there were 3 of them: OTG Mariupol, OTG Luhansk, and OTG Donetsk. But by 2016, OTGs Mariupol and Luhansk had been disbanded. And then OTG Donetsk was split in 2 commands: OTG East, which covered the Donetsk front line, and OTG North for the Luhansk one. So in summary, the chain of command looked like this. You had independent battalions, plus battalions encapsulated into brigades, all under the command of the headquarters of the OTG. And then the OTGs reported back to the general staff. This temporary command structure composed of operational tactical groups remained in place until today. And that's the problem. The benefit of this structure is that it was rapidly implemented and ideal for the war Ukraine was waging in Donbass, with relatively few troops and small areas to control. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. We can mention the creation of the 11th Reserve Corps in 2016, but once again it was more administrative than anything else. Like a scheme for high-ranking officers to be paid to do nothing. Everybody was happy with the structure until everything changed in February 2022, with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian army experienced a rapid expansion in manpower, but also in the number of sectors it suddenly had to defend from hostile forces. Essentially, half the country.
All hope is failing, my lord!
In response, the General Staff quickly created larger structures called Operational Strategic Group of Forces that looked over smaller sectors. The order of battle was reshuffled several times in those chaotic first weeks of the war, but eventually 3 OSGs were kept: Khortytsia, Tavria, and Pivnich. For instance, Operational Strategic Group Khortytsia was led by a yet unknown officer, Colonel General Alexander Syrsky. From his headquarters, he oversaw at least 5 operational tactical groups: Kharkiv, Luhansk, Donetsk, Liman, and Soledar, each one of them broken down in even smaller tactical groupings. There are 2 things we can immediately point out. First, the territorial overlap between OTG's Luhansk and Soledar, and second, the fact that Syrsky had to look over 5 groups, whereas most NATO armies typically control only 3 subordinate formations. These strategic and tactical groupings initially appeared to be the most effective way to defend an extended front line. Each tactical grouping was assigned to a fixed area of control, and then multiple ones of these tactical groupings were then commanded by an operational strategic group. You know, it's a bit like when you have your cousins over for the holidays and you're looking for extra PS5 controllers. Then you tell your siblings and cousins, You look upstairs, you look downstairs, you look in the kitchen, you look in the backyard, as far as possible. Everyone is assigned to a sector and they report back to you. Tactical groupings also give the general staff flexibility to quickly shift units between OTGs, which was perfect for the high crisis management situation Ukraine found itself in the first weeks and months of the war. As long as Russian forces were themselves disorganized and short on manpower, the AFU structure worked, showcased by Ukraine's Kharkiv counteroffensive. However, the moment the Russian armed forces mobilized hundreds of thousands of men and abandoned their doctrine centered on battalion tactical groups, that's when things became complicated for the AFU, especially since the Russian army opted to return to the good old Soviet structure, with regiments operating as part of divisions supported by autonomous brigades. These units are integrated into what Russia terms a combined arms army, which, by NATO standards, is equivalent in strength and function to an army corps. Like my neighbor says, when in doubt, go Soviet, or hold on, was it go commando? As the war dragged on and turned into a battle of attrition, the inefficiencies of the command structure of the AFU became more and more apparent. Ukrainian journalist Yuri Butusov noted that in some cases, a tactical group commanded by a colonel ended up responsible for 22 brigades and dozens of separate battalions and companies. What a nightmare! The operational tactical groups were further limited by their rigid ties to geographical sectors, although initially these were logical in a defensive posture, for fronts that are mostly static. But this doesn't work if the front suddenly becomes mobile. Its area of control would overlap with the one of another grouping. But that's not the worst. The main problem was that while an OTG headquarters commanded troops within its sector, it didn't actually own them. It's the general staff that retained all the control. It's like a football coach, mid-game, being told his best striker is now being transferred to another team. And minutes later, another order comes. Half his veteran players are going to be pulled out at once, only to be replaced by newbies. All this to say that the commanders of these OTGs could only do best with what they had readily available. Finally, because these groups were non-permanent formations, their headquarters constantly had to rotate staff officers drawn from different brigades, further undermining cohesion. One day in the war room, you have officers from brigades 1, 2, and 3, and the next week, they're all gone. Now you have brigades 4, 5, and 6 under your command. Because of all this, in 2023, the AFU experimented going back to the old ways by implementing Army Corps, or in Ukrainian Armyski Korpus, initials AK. Indeed, you can't go more Soviet than that. But it's actually on November 19th, 2022, that the 9th Army Corps was officially created. Unlike the operational strategic and tactical groups, the Army Corps would have a clearly defined set of units under its command. Compared to the inherently defensive operational tactical groups, the corps were much more flexible. Just like with Napoleon's Grande Armée, the corps was ideal for offensive actions and maneuver operations, ready at any moment to exploit the gaps in enemy defenses. Eventually, that's how the 9th and 10th Army Corps came to be for the upcoming 2023 summer offensive. 9th Corps was meant to break through, and 10th Corps was kept in reserve to exploit the breach. To this effect, the 9th Corps was composed of the 33rd and 47th Mechanized Brigades, while the 10th Corps included the 116th, 117th, and 118th Mechanized Brigades, plus the 46th Air Mobile Brigade and the Scala Battalion. As always, it looked perfect on paper, especially to NATO officers. But there are already a lot of problems. First of all, 9th Corps was much weaker than 10th Corps, when 9th Corps is the one supposed to break enemy lines. And what's even the point of creating a corps that only has 2 brigades? And the elephant in the room, all of these mechanized brigades in the 9th and 10th Army Corps, the infamous NATO-trained brigades but filled with inexperienced personnel. Additionally, this rapid implementation in times of war resulted in an ineffective chain of command, because these army corps fell under the jurisdiction of tactical groupings. They were not actually independent. Look, who doesn't love yet another layer of bureaucracy? Now these nesting dolls make so much more sense. The AFU works the same way! After having been defeated during the summer offensive, the AFU urgently had to halt Russia's counterattack near Avdiivka, and due to the critical situation, Army Corps were thrown out of the window as fast as they came to be. The 9th Army Corps split in October 2023. The 47th Mechanized was sent to Avdiivka, and the 33rd Mechanized was later sent to contain the Russian advance in Kurakhove. The 10th Army Corps was also pulled apart. The 116th Mechanized Brigade was redeployed to Avdiivka and then moved to Kupiansk in May 2024. Meanwhile, the 117th Mechanized Brigade was transferred from the Zaporozhye front to Ocheretine in July 2024. Lastly, the 46th Air Mobile Brigade was redeployed to Marinka in November 2023, leaving only the 118th Mechanized behind. Thus, the 10th Army Corps was no more. Yes, because breaking up units and sending them piecemeal to the front was the trademark of the Ukrainian General Staff in 2024. And like many Ukrainian analysts complained, we can talk about the micromanagement of the General Staff. Due to manpower shortages, OTGs not only saw their frontline units melt down, but they depended entirely on the central command for reinforcements. As a result, Russian units exploited weaknesses and gaps, such as between the junction of two units, or even better, two tactical groupings. Actually, there's another reason why all this keeps happening over and over again, but I'll have to tell you at the end of the video. By fall 2024, Ukrainian formations had to deal with an absurd division of power on the battlefield. Take the 100th Mechanized Brigade, for example, that was simultaneously under the command of the 9th Army Corps, Operational Command West, OTG Luhansk, which itself is part of Operational Strategic Group Hortitsia, and as a reminder, which is responsible for the front going from the north of Kharkiv all the way south to Zaporozhye. And all this under command of the General Staff. It's like working in the type of companies where you have multiple bosses. I remember working in a company like that, a restaurant with 3 bosses, all of them Greeks. And it happened that they gave me contradicting orders. And then you're just wondering which one you have to listen to. And then you're put in a position where you don't really know what to do. All you know is that if there's a problem, it's gonna be your fault. That's how in November 2024, discussions were ongoing for a full transition to a core system, which would eliminate temporary bodies of command like the operational tactical groupings. In other words, the great reform of the armed forces of Ukraine. On the 3rd of February 2025, President Zelensky publicly announced the transition to a new organizational structure of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the creation of corps has already been approved. He added, "We maintained focus on this implementation. The core system is necessary." And on the 23rd of February, Commander-in-Chief Syrsky also mentioned how corps will replace OTGs at the front. So they're going to copy the Russian structure, but say it was their idea all along. That's how the Ukrainian command planned to create 20 army corps and gradually disband operational tactical groupings. And this time they returned to the drawing board and learned from their failed attempts in the summer of 2023. One corps will hold a fixed section of the front with a force consisting of the same 4 to 5 brigades. Each corps will have its own headquarters, with the same staff officers this time, something that will greatly increase cohesion. And the corps will also be provided with more margin of autonomy to carry out combat missions without the need for constant involvement of the General Staff. Reinforcements and the rotation of personnel and units will happen within the same corps, which will also be responsible for training and reducing or increasing the front coverage of a brigade. Hopefully, the creation of corps will also stop the senseless pump and dump of Ukrainian rifle battalions, filled with mobilized personnel just to plug holes at the front, only to be disbanded once casualties are too high.
And it's gone.
When the first battalion gets destroyed, the one that is following takes up the position and holds the line. And then above the corps, we still have the operational strategic groupings that will control multiple corps at once. So the new structure of the Ukrainian army after the corps reform would look like this: battalions, brigades, corps, and operational strategic grouping. Effectively, OSGs are what we would call an army, as they command multiple army corps. You probably also noticed that Ukraine completely skipped over the divisional system, going directly from brigades to corps. Long story short, the only explanation is that they don't have enough time, and it's too complicated to put in place at the moment in times of war. To implement the reform, the General Staff decided to start on the basis of the best brigades of the armed forces of Ukraine. On the 14th of March 2025, the 3rd Assault Brigade Azov, under the command of 46-year-old Andriy Belitsky, would form the backbone of the 3rd Army Corps. 1 month later, the 1st Azov Corps was created based on the 12th Brigade Azov. That's how the 34-year-old commander of that brigade, Denis Prokopenko, one of the defenders of Mariupol that was captured by the Russians, then became commander of the 1st Azov Corps. Let's look at the order of battle of this new formation. The 12th Brigade Azov, but also the 1st Presidential Operational Brigade Burevi, the 14th Chervona Kalina Brigade, the 15th Operational Assignment Karadagh, and the 20th Operational Brigade Lyubart. Most of these units stem from Ukraine's Offensive Guard program launched in February 2023, which initially only recruited volunteers. Now I'm pretty sure they also have mobilized personnel, but at least they all have the same ideology. Observers noted that the 12th Azov and 3rd Assault Brigade simply had more competent new school personnel with combat experience, who can form the backbone of a corps' headquarters. On the 17th of April, Ukraine's National Guard officially unveiled the 2nd Khartia Corps, formed on the basis of the Khartia Brigade. That's how the armed forces of Ukraine lined up their first 3 army corps. The next question was how to distribute Ukraine's 100-plus brigades into about 20 corps so that each one of them is balanced. I mean, you want all these corps to be able to stand their ground, but also to launch a counterattack if need be. For example, on the 31st of July, Military Land reported how the battle-hardened 93rd Mechanized Brigade has joined the 21st Army Corps. It will be supported by another strong unit, the 4th Heavy Mechanized Brigade, to which the General Staff added the 3 atrocious 152nd, 155th, and 159th Mechanized Brigades. Whenever you see 150-something, you know that brigade is complete trash. These brigades have the highest rate of desertion of all Ukrainian formations. Example number 2, as you can see here, all the corps will be assigned a heavy mechanized brigade. Those are like diet tank brigades. They're only called heavy mechanized because they have less tanks than they used to. And the remaining armored units have been broken down in order to standardize all Ukrainian corps. Ideally, that means the AFU would not require the intervention of firefighter units from across the map, like Azov, to counterattack in critical sectors. All this would now be possible from detachments operating within the same corps, but once again, I say ideally. Ideally, the brigades within the same corps would already be operating next to each other. To this effect, the 17th Army Corps replaced the Operational Tactical Group Zaporizhia, and the 20th Corps replaced Tactical Group Vuhledar. Yeah, which is now operating 50 kilometers away from Vuhledar. Thus, throughout the summer of 2025, came multiple announcements in regards to the new corps being formed, as well as their order of battle. As of now, we can list 18 army corps. We have the 1st Azov Corps, the 2nd Khartia Corps, the 3rd Totally Not Azov Corps, the 7th and 8th Assault Corps, and then the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, no 13, no bad luck, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st Corps, plus the 30th Marine Corps. Now that Ukraine is transitioning to army corps, that's it, right? The war is won. Well, yeah, not so fast. The first challenge is to make sure all the brigades within the same army corps are adjacent to one another. Yes, for sure, this is the case for the 17th and 20th Army Corps, but we can't say the same about all the others. For example, the 2nd Corps of the National Guard, one of the first ones to be created, still has its brigades spread out across the front. Same story for the 12th Army Corps and the 9th Corps as well. Because this structure right here is much worse than whatever Ukraine had before. It's a complete mess. The brigades of the same corps are simultaneously under the command of multiple OTGs, spread across the map. But, with that being said, this transition will take some time, but I think this is a problem that is manageable. But now, if you decide to get 20 army corps, suddenly you also need 20 corps commanders, and the entire staff that goes with it. Where do you find these people? One of the solutions was to rapidly promote brigade commanders, like Andrei Biletsky, that went from the 3rd Assault Brigade to command the 3rd Corps. However, many Ukrainian military observers warned that a skillful brigade commander will not necessarily become a competent corps commander, who will have to look over several brigades, but also artillery, air defense, and other units at once. This is what another analyst told the Kyiv Post. The main issue is staff officers. We need people who can plan and lead at the tactical level. Majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels who can understand the broader situation and think strategically. This is a completely different combat reality, and we need officers with different skill sets. A challenge that Ukraine is already facing at the brigade level. So many incompetent commanders remain in position because there's simply no one else to take their position. Actually, I have to tell you about Colonel Valery Kurach. In 2024, Kurach led the Vuhledar tactical group. He failed to make a timely decision to withdraw troops when the flanks collapsed, which led to the Uspenivka encirclement near Kurakhove and heavy infantry losses. For this reason, he was dismissed from his post. He was fired and we never heard of him ever again. No, really, how do you think Ukraine dealt with such an incompetent officer? He was promoted to lead the 21st Army Corps. Oh my god, I can't believe it.
Madness. Madness and stupidity.
And not only that, I fear the possible promotion of all the incompetent commanders and staff officers from the former OTGs into the newly formed Army Corps. In that case, the great transition to Army Corps will not have the expected results. Ukrainskaya Pravda interviewed a Ukrainian officer who added, in addition to recruiting incompetent people, there's also a problem with selling positions.
Son of a...
Selling what? Why am I even surprised? I mean, it's Ukraine after all. But to only shift the blame on all these commanders without looking at the general staff would also be unfair. There are many other systemic issues throughout the military, like Soviet-style culture. You see many brigade commanders are penalized when reporting bad news, like having understrength battalions or the loss of a position. So yeah, they get penalized when reporting bad news. So what do you think they do? They submit false reports up to the hierarchy, to the general staff, which then has to analyze a false reality of the front line. And the problem is that if you're actually honest and report the truth, you're sacked. This often jeopardizes the neighboring units and creates gaps in which Russian troops can infiltrate. So even if corps are implemented, if this culture doesn't evolve, the AFU will just be repacking the same problem. But I will keep that for another video. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The link is in the description below.